This video is going to be a walkthrough on how to use your Uniswap V3 LP position as collateral to borrow against using the Wild Credit platform. So we'll start by jumping into the app. And while that loads, I'll just jump into the Uniswap dashboard just to highlight that as part of this walkthrough, I'm going to be using the DAI USDC pairs. Now you can use any other V3 LP pairs on the basis that those two particular assets are offered as lending pools within the Wild Credit platform. Now I'll also be using this particular LP position because there's quite an opportunistic yield farming strategy that's offered through the platform using this stablecoin pair, as well as given the size of the liquidity mining rewards currently offered. So we'll jump into the platform. Now this first screen that we get taken to summarizes the variety of assets that you can borrow through the platform. Now given we're using the USDC and DAI LP position, we want to click through to those two assets. So we'll start by clicking through to USDC. And then once this page loads, we'll want to click through to the DAI pair. This next screen is where we're going to be able to actually execute the borrowing arrangement. Now there's a number of inputs as well as metrics associated with the assets as part of the borrowing arrangement, as well as the interest rates applied, but we'll get to those shortly. I think the key point at this stage is just to highlight that at the bottom left here, we can see that my Uniswap V3 LP position is showing up. And we want to click through to this link to begin the process. And the first step here is enabling the collateral, enabling the position to be used as collateral. And then just approve that transaction. We can see that that's all gone through correctly now. The transaction has been approved because the link has been updated from enable collateral to disable collateral. And we can also see up this top line collateral. We can see that Uni V3 LP is now showing up. Now, before we start inputting amounts that we want to borrow, just two key callouts from a Uniswap perspective or a V3 position perspective. The first one being that now that you've enabled collateral, it's now housed within the Wild Credit platform. So when you do jump to this dashboard, you won't be able to see your position. So we're just calling that out just so you don't get concerned when you don't see your position there. The second point to call out is that even if your V3 position falls out of range, that can still be used as collateral to borrow against through the Wild Credit platform. So we'll jump back to the platform. Now our starting point here is basically highlighting this section, which is where we input the amount that we want to borrow. So what I'll start off by doing is I'll start off by putting an amount of $5,000. And we'll talk through the metrics now that we've got a number in there before we actually execute that transaction. So starting off within this borrowed line here, we can see that the number on the left is the number that we're going to borrow. So we can see that that number is consistent with the input section. Then the number to the right is our maximum borrowing capacity based on the collateral that we've enabled. And that number is being driven off the safety ratio, which I'll get to shortly. We can see that there's a minimum borrowing amount of $5,000, which is a fixed amount set by the protocol at the moment. The next line is the reserves, which is similar to most other money market platforms, just highlighting the amount of assets that are provided within this particular pair. So we can see that there's $12,500 of USDC and around $77,000 worth of DAI within the reserves. Now the safety ratio is an adaptation of the loan to value ratio. So across the board, across all lending pools, the protocol sets the loan to value ratio at 60%. So like other money market platforms, if that loan to value ratio exceeds that number, then you'll be up for liquidation, and under that number provide you with a bit of a buffer. Now the safety ratio has been adapted just to make it a lot easier for a user to manage that, and it's basically saying that the formula works out that if a safety ratio of 1 or anything below that will mean that your position is up for liquidation, and anything above that means that your position is in a healthy range. Now, for any more further information on that, you can click through this link, which will take you through to the wild credit documentation. Now, jumping down to this section, we can see the interest rates when you supply collateral as part of the lending pool. We can see when you borrow from the pool what the interest cost will be, and then we can see the yield farming rewards attached to this particular lending pair. Now, a call out for the Uniswap V3 position being used as collateral, that you don't actually get that supply interest rate. So that's only received when you're providing the standalone collateral. So in this case, if you're providing just DAI and not a Uniswap V3 position as collateral. So what's interesting as part of this UI is that it allows you to be quite dynamic and do some scenario analysis based on how much you want to borrow. So say we leave it at $5,000 that we want to borrow, we can see that the interest rate is based on how much you're taking out of the reserves. Our interest rate is 19% with yield farming rewards of 55% APY. Now, if we wanted to take out more, we can see that number jumps up to quite a high number, and that's representative of the utilization calculation feeding into the interest rate formula. And like most other money market platforms, the more you take out or the more you borrow out of the reserves, the higher the interest rate will go. Now, a couple of UI points, just as an FYI, that if you do try to take out more than your borrowing capacity, a flag will come up saying that you've got insufficient collateral to be able to take out that much. And if you happen to have a fat finger error that you want to take out more than in the reserves, then we can see that 17,000 is in there. So if we take out 20,000, that flag will also come up. So going back to the amount that I want to take out to borrow, so I want to borrow $5,000, and we can see that that's quite a healthy safety ratio. Again, not as relevant for a stablecoin based pair, but when you're talking about high volatile assets, you want to ensure that you have quite a healthy safety ratio to be able to buffer for that particular volatility. So we'll now execute that transaction. So it looks like putting through 5,000 will show the flag of you're hitting the minimum borrow amount. So we'll just go slightly above that. If I reject that first one, I'll execute that one. Now, while that's being approved, I just want to draw your attention to the opportunistic yield farming strategy that I was mentioning earlier. So we can see that the borrowing cost is 20% and the yield farming rewards 55%. So at these levels, we are currently seeing that if you participate in this yield farming strategy, you're actually in a net positive position when you're actually borrowing collateral, which is quite opportunistic. Now that transaction has been approved, we can see that the borrowed funds are now showing up in the MetaMask account. And we can jump to the dashboard section, which essentially provides an aggregate view of all your borrowing positions. Now we'll be able to see that our borrowed position is highlighted by these negative numbers next to the APR and the actual amount that we've borrowed. So the negative 5.2 indicative of how much we've borrowed, and negative 19% indicative of our borrowing cost. Now, because we again coming back to my point that because we're not providing a single asset collateral, we're not entitled to that supply APR rate. And then we're highlighting just our safety ratio here. Now to then go back into your position to look to repay it when you're ready to repay, we can just click through to this link here. And that'll take us back to the screen where we executed the borrowing transaction. Now, in order to repay the borrowed amount, we just have to click on this button here. And I want to repay my debt in full. So we click max. And you can see that, again, consistent with borrowing amount being brought down to 0, as well as our safety ratio getting cleared too. So we'll click repay. And we'll approve that transaction. Now, once that transaction has been approved, we can see that our borrowed amount has gone down to 0. And again, safety ratio continues to be cleared. And we can see that MetaMask is there's no more borrowed amounts anymore. Now, the final step in order to completely close out your borrowing arrangement through the Wild Credit platform is now disabling the collateral, or the Uniswap v3 collateral. Once that's been approved, we can see that collateral is now free to use outside of the Wild Credit platform. We can see that link has now changed from disable collateral to enable collateral. We can see that little Uni v3 note up here has been removed as well. So if we jump back to the dashboard, you no longer see any positions being found now that that's been cleared. And if you jump to the Uniswap dashboard, you'll see that the Uniswap v3 position is now free to use based on how you want to take your actions going forward. And that's it. If you have any questions or in terms of how to navigate through those steps, feel free to jump into the Discord. The founder is very accessible if you want to run any queries by them, as well as the community being super friendly to help out with any questions as well.